Hi, I'm Nida, I'm 27. And 3 years ago, my billionaire father threw me out of his house like I was a stranger. No money, no family. Just the sound of that heavy door slamming behind me. I thought that was the end of my story. Until the brother he loved more than me lost everything. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family, betrayal, and emotional courage. I still remember the echo of that door. Heavy, final, and cold. It wasn't just a sound. It was the moment everything I believed about family shattered into pieces. My name's Nida, and I was 24 when my father decided I didn't belong in his world anymore. It was late, close to midnight. The storm outside was so loud it drowned out the last bit of my pride. I was standing in the middle of our long marble hallway, suitcase in hand, watching my father pace back and forth like he was arguing with himself more than with me. "Dad, please," I said, my voice trembling though I tried to hold it steady. "You're overreacting." He turned sharply. His gray hair was wet at the ends from the rain he'd walked through earlier, and his tie hung loose around his neck. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was disappointment, which somehow hurt worse. "Overreacting," he said. "You embarrassed me, Nida. Do you have any idea what people are saying? My own daughter working at a grocery store? When I've given you everything." I swallowed hard. "You didn't give me everything, Dad. You gave me rules. You gave me a name I couldn't live up to." His jaw tightened. He didn't like being talked back to, not even when I was a kid. He'd always been that man who wanted silence when he spoke. The kind who didn't argue. He ended conversations. Behind him, the living room lights flickered from the storm. My stepmother stood by the staircase, her arms crossed like a silent judge. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her smirk said enough. And then there was Luke, my younger half-brother, Dad's golden boy. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, that same careless grin he always wore when I got in trouble. "Maybe she should go, Dad," he said lightly. "If she doesn't like how things are done here, she can figure it out on her own." That did it. I looked at him, his designer clothes, his watch that probably cost more than my entire car, and felt something twist inside me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them all that I wasn't the problem, that I just wanted to be seen as a person, not as someone's reputation to protect. But my father's voice cut through my thoughts. "You're leaving tonight," he said, low but firm. "Pack your things. You'll not step foot in this house again until you learn respect." My heart dropped. "You're serious?" He didn't even look at me when he said, "I'm done, Nida." I walked to my room in silence. Every step echoed against the marble floors, like a countdown to exile. That room had been mine since I was 10, filled with old books, posters, and the faint smell of lavender from my mother's perfume. Back when she was still alive. She would have never let this happen. I packed quickly. Few clothes. My nursing books. A framed photo of Mom. I didn't take anything expensive, somehow that felt like proving his point. When I walked back downstairs, he was still standing there, same posture, same expression. "Where will you go?" my stepmother asked in her sweet, insincere voice. I ignored her. "Dad," I said, "I don't need your money. I just need you to know that this isn't fair." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Life isn't fair, Nida. But maybe once you're out there, you'll finally learn what responsibility looks like." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My throat felt like sandpaper. I nodded instead, quietly, because I knew if I said anything more I'd cry. When I stepped outside, the rain hit me like needles. The sky was pitch black, thunder rolling in waves. I pulled my coat tighter, clutching the suitcase handle as I walked down the driveway. Halfway to my car, I turned around just once. The mansion's lights glowed faintly through the rain, blurred and distant, like a dream fading too fast. And then the door shut. Hard. That sound, the echo of wood and metal, hit me straight in the chest. It wasn't just a door closing. It was a chapter ending, one I never thought would. I sat in the car for a long time before starting the engine. The rain drummed against the roof, the air inside thick and damp. I checked my phone, 5 missed calls from friends, none from him. That was the moment I realized I was completely on my own. I drove aimlessly for hours. The city lights gave way to empty roads, and soon there were only gas stations and motels flashing red vacancy signs. I didn't have enough money for a room, So I pulled into a rest stop and parked near a flickering lamppost. The car smelled like wet fabric and old coffee. I leaned back in the seat trying to calm the storm inside my chest. It wasn't fear. It was the sudden emptiness of knowing the people you love most can treat you like a stranger. I thought about calling him, just to say I made it somewhere safe. But I didn't. I wanted him to feel the silence he'd created. At dawn, I woke up to the sound of trucks on the highway. My neck ached from sleeping in the driver's seat. My clothes were damp. I washed my face in the gas station bathroom, using paper towels and cold water. The woman at the counter gave me a look of pity when I paid for coffee with coins. I didn't care. I told myself this was temporary. I'd find a job. I'd figure it out. But that first morning, sitting in the parking lot with coffee that tasted like burnt plastic, I finally let myself cry. Not because I'd lost a home, but because I'd lost a version of myself that still believed my father could love me the way I needed. Later that day, I found a help-wanted sign at a small diner off the highway. It wasn't much, just a plain red building with peeling paint and a sign that read Marty's. The woman behind the counter, Janet, looked like she'd seen 1,000 people walk in with broken hearts and empty wallets. "You ever wait tables before?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I learned fast." She looked me up and down. "You got a place to stay?" I hesitated, then shook my head. She nodded slowly. "You can park your car out back for now. Safer there than out front." I didn't realize how much that small kindness meant until I heard myself say, "Thank you," and almost started crying again. That night I sat in my car, the diner's neon sign flickering through the windshield. For the first time since leaving home, I didn't feel like a total ghost. Maybe I was still unwanted, but at least I wasn't invisible. A few nights later, as I refilled coffee for the truck drivers, I caught my reflection in the window. Tired eyes, wrinkled uniform, hair tied up in a messy bun. But there was something new in that reflection too, a spark. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. It was something simpler, survival. I didn't know then that this night, the night my father shut the door, would be the beginning of everything that followed. That one day, years later, I'd walk back through that same door. Not as his daughter begging for love, but as the woman he'd be forced to depend on. But that's a story for another night. For a long moment I just stood there, staring at the closed door. The one that had once opened to everything I knew. Safety, comfort, and love. Now it was just wood and silence. The porch light flickered weakly above me, like it was struggling to stay alive too. I wanted to knock again, to scream, to beg him to open it and say it was a mistake. But my legs wouldn't move. My voice wouldn't come out. It was as if my entire world had frozen in that instant. The night air was cold, sharp against my cheeks. I could hear the city beyond the gates, cars, laughter, life going on as if nothing had happened. But inside me, everything had gone quiet. My billionaire father had kicked me out like I was a stranger, and all I had was the small suitcase at my feet. I finally forced myself to walk away, one trembling step after another. The sound of my heels on the stone driveway felt too loud, like it was echoing the truth I didn't want to believe. I don't belong here anymore. I didn't know where to go. My friends were all from the same world, the same expensive, polished circles my father's money built. None of them would understand what it felt like to suddenly have nothing. I thought of calling my stepmother, but then I remembered her cold eyes that night at dinner, the way she had whispered something to him before everything exploded. By the time I reached the gate, tears had already blurred my vision. The guard, an older man named Ramesh who'd worked for my father for years, looked at me with pity. "Miss Nida," he began, his voice soft, uncertain. "It's okay," I whispered, forcing a smile that broke halfway through. He made his choice. He hesitated before opening the gate. For a brief second I thought he might say something, maybe tell me to stay until morning. But loyalty runs deep in houses like ours. He only nodded, and the gates opened with a slow, heavy creak that sounded like the end of everything I knew. When I stepped out onto the street, I realized for the first time in my life, I had no driver, no car waiting, no plan. Just me, and the cold, dark road ahead. The first night was the hardest. I ended up at a small, cheap motel off the highway, the kind of place I'd only seen from the tinted windows of my father's limousine. The room smelled like dust and loneliness. The mattress sagged in the middle, and the window faced a neon sign that buzzed all night. I curled up on the edge of the bed, clutching my suitcase like it could protect me from everything that had just happened. I kept replaying his words in my head. "You've embarrassed this family enough, Nida. You're on your own now." The way he said family stung the most, like I wasn't part of it anymore. I cried until my throat burned, until there were no tears left. And when the silence came, it was heavier than before. But when the sun rose and pale light filled that ugly little room, something inside me shifted. I didn't know what to call it yet. Maybe survival, maybe pride, but it whispered softly, "You're still here." The next few days blurred together. I walked miles looking for a job, any job. It didn't matter that I had a business degree from Stanford, or that I'd once attended charity galas in designer gowns. To everyone I met, I was just another young woman desperate for work. I lied about my last name when I applied at a local cafe, told them my name was just Nida Ray, not Nida Raymond. I didn't want anyone connecting me to the man who owned half the city. The manager, a middle-aged woman named Carol, gave me a doubtful look but handed me an apron anyway. "Can you handle a morning shift?" she asked. "I can handle anything," I said. And for the first time I actually meant it. The first morning was brutal. My hands shook when I poured coffee, and I spilled sugar all over the counter. But by the end of the shift, when a tired old man smiled at me and said, "Thanks, sweetheart," I felt something strange, something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Nights were still hard. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, my father's expression when he turned away. Sometimes I'd dream I was back in the mansion, and he was calling my name, only to wake up in the tiny motel room with the buzzing neon light. One evening after a long day at work, I got a message from an unknown number. My hands trembled as I opened it. "You think you can survive without him?" There was no name, but I knew who it was from. My stepmother. I deleted it instantly, my heart pounding. She'd always wanted me gone, and now she had exactly what she wanted. But something inside me hardened. For the first time, I didn't cry. Instead, I whispered to myself, "You'll see. I'll make it without him. I'll learn to breathe again." As the weeks passed, I started getting used to my new life. It wasn't easy, but it was real. I learned how to take the bus, how to stretch $1, how to smile even when my heart ached. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning a table, I overheard two regulars talking. "Did you hear about Mr. Raymond's new venture?" one of them said. "He's expanding again. Some big charity event next week." My chest tightened. I turned away quickly before anyone could see the look on my face. My father was moving on, living his perfect billionaire life, and I was serving coffee 3 blocks away. But instead of breaking me, the thought fueled me. That night, I stayed up late researching online courses. I found one for accounting and started studying again, late into the nights, sitting by the motel window with my laptop balanced on my knees. Slowly, piece by piece, I began rebuilding the life he'd taken from me. Then one morning, Carol pulled me aside after my shift. "You've been working hard, Nida," she said. "There's a part-time position opening at our main branch downtown. Better pay, better hours. Interested?" My eyes widened. "Are you serious?" She smiled. "I don't joke about promotions. You've earned it." I almost hugged her right there. It wasn't much compared to what I'd once had, but to me it felt like everything. That night, as I walked back to the motel, I caught my reflection in a shop window. My hair was tied back, my hands smelled faintly of coffee and soap, and my clothes weren't expensive, but the girl looking back at me wasn't broken anymore. She was standing tall, breathing steady. I whispered to my reflection, "You're doing it, Nida. You're breathing again." A month later, I moved into a small studio apartment, tiny but it was mine. The first thing I bought wasn't furniture or decoration. It was a plant. A small green thing that leaned toward the light. I named it Hope. Every morning, I'd water it before heading to work, and every night, I'd look at it and remind myself how far I'd come. One evening, as I sat on my bed with my dinner, instant noodles and a cup of tea, I thought about my father again. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. Just sadness and a quiet sort of understanding. Maybe he thought he was teaching me a lesson. Maybe he thought cutting me off would make me stronger. He wasn't entirely wrong. But he'd also lost something. A daughter who would have loved him no matter what his money could buy. Weeks turned into months. I worked, studied, saved every penny I could. And little by little, I started breathing freely again, not because life got easier, but because I got stronger. Sometimes I'd see news about my family online, photos of my father and stepmother at charity events, smiling for cameras. I didn't click on them anymore. I didn't need to, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't living in their shadow. I was building something that was mine. And that was when I realized breathing again wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about learning to live with it and still find reasons to move forward. That night, I stood by my window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my father was probably at a gala, surrounded by people who adored his wealth but didn't know his heart. I whispered softly into the quiet room, "You may have shut the door, Dad, but I found another way to open one." Then I turned off the light, lay down, and for the first time since that night, I slept peacefully. The morning after that peaceful sleep felt unusually quiet. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, painting soft gold lines across the floor. For the first time in months, I woke up without that heavy ache in my chest. I made my coffee, watered my little plant Hope, and smiled as its leaves glistened under the light. It was just another ordinary day, or so I thought. My phone buzzed while I was buttoning my cafe uniform. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. Normally I'd have ignored it, but something, maybe instinct, maybe curiosity, made me answer. "Hello," I said, tucking the phone between my shoulder and ear as I tied my apron. There was silence for a moment, followed by a trembling female voice. "Is this Nida Raymond?" I froze. No one had called me that name in almost a year. My throat tightened. "Who's asking?" "This is Linda," she said softly. "Your father's assistant. Mr. Raymond. He's been in an accident." The world seemed to stop spinning. My knees went weak. "What did you just say?" She hesitated. "He's in the hospital. It's serious, Nida. You should come." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The walls around me blurred. I felt that same sharp, crushing panic I'd felt the night he shut the door on me. Only this time it wasn't anger, it was fear. I barely remembered locking the apartment door or running down the street. My hands shook as I called a cab, my voice breaking as I gave the address to the driver. The entire ride I stared out the window watching the city blur past, the same streets I'd once driven down in luxury, now a maze of memories I wasn't ready to face. When I reached the hospital, the sterile smell of disinfectant hit me first. The bright white lights, the sound of machines, the hurried footsteps. Everything felt like a dream I couldn't wake from. I saw Linda waiting by the hallway. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Nida," she breathed, surprised, maybe even relieved. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice shaking. "ICU. They're still stabilizing him." My legs carried me down the hallway before she could say more. Through the glass window I saw him, my father, lying motionless on the bed, wires and tubes connected everywhere. His face looked pale, smaller somehow, stripped of the power and pride that used to fill every room he walked into. A lump rose in my throat. I pressed my hand to the glass, my heart breaking all over again. "Dad." I didn't even notice the woman standing beside the bed until she turned around. My stepmother. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked sharply. I swallowed hard. "Linda called me." "She had no right," she hissed. "You don't belong here anymore, Nida." For a second her words stung just like they used to. But this time I didn't crumble. I straightened my back. "He's my father. Whether you like it or not, I have every right to be here." She glared at me, lips pressed into a thin line. "You made your choice when you walked away." "I didn't walk away," I said quietly. "He pushed me out." Before she could respond, a doctor came out of the room, removing his gloves. "Mrs. Raymond?" We both turned toward him. "He's stable for now," the doctor said. "But there's some spinal damage. We won't know the full extent until he wakes up." Spinal damage. The words hit me like a punch. My father, the man who ruled boardrooms, who commanded everyone around him, might never walk again. The next few hours felt endless. I sat outside the ICU, my heart pounding every time a nurse walked past. My stepmother kept her distance, pretending to be busy on her phone, but I could feel her eyes on me now and then, full of irritation and something else. Fear, maybe. Around noon, Linda came and handed me a cup of coffee. "He's been asking for you," she whispered. I blinked. "What?" When he briefly woke up after the surgery, the first name he said was yours. Something inside me cracked open. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but part of me was afraid to hope. Hours later, a nurse came to tell us he was awake. My stepmother rushed in first. I stayed behind, my hands trembling. When I finally entered, his eyes were open, weak but aware. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment it was like time folded back on itself. Nida. His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Hi, Dad, I said softly, tears threatening to fall. He stared at me, confusion flickering across his face. You're here. I came as soon as I heard. He swallowed, his lips trembling. I thought you'd never forgive me. I moved closer, gripping his hand gently. You're my father. I could never hate you. A single tear slid down his cheek, the first I'd ever seen. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits and quiet conversations. My father was different now, humbled, fragile, human. He apologized more than once, though his voice often broke before he could finish. I let pride come between us, he said one evening, his eyes glistening. I thought I was teaching you responsibility, but I only pushed you away. I squeezed his hand. You don't have to say anything. You're here. That's enough. But the truth was, it wasn't that simple. Forgiveness didn't erase the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, or the years I'd felt unwanted. It didn't erase the way he'd looked at me when he shut that door. Still, seeing him like this, helpless, broken, softened something inside me. One afternoon, as I helped him adjust his blanket, he whispered, I need you to stay. I froze. Stay. He nodded weakly. Your stepmother. She doesn't understand the business. And after the accident, I can't do what I used to. I need someone I can trust. Trust. The word hit differently now. I hesitated. I have my own life now, Dad. My job, my apartment. I'll make it right this time, he said, his eyes pleading. Please, Nida. And there it was, the moment that would change everything again. For days I struggled with the decision. Part of me wanted to go back, to take care of him, to rebuild what we'd lost. But another part of me was terrified. Terrified that I'd lose the independence I'd fought so hard for. One evening I sat by my apartment window, staring at the city lights. Hope sat on the windowsill, its leaves drooping slightly. I hadn't watered it that day, too distracted by my thoughts. My phone rang again. It was the hospital. This time it wasn't Linda. It was my father. Nida. His voice was faint but clear. I meant what I said. I need you here. But more than that, I want you here. Not as my daughter who depends on me, but as the woman I'm proud of. My heart clenched. For the first time, he wasn't talking like the powerful billionaire who always expected obedience. He was talking like a father who finally saw his child for who she truly was. I didn't answer right away. I just listened, to the sound of his breathing, slow and uncertain. Then I whispered, Okay, I'll come tomorrow. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Then I stood, picked up the little plant and whispered, Looks like it's time to move again, Hope. The next morning, I walked into the hospital room with a bag of clean clothes and a small smile. My father's eyes lit up when he saw me. You came, he said, relief flooding his face. I said I would. He chuckled weakly. Still as stubborn as ever. Guess I learned from the best, I teased softly. For the first time in years we laughed together, not as a father and daughter from different worlds, but as two people learning to start over. As I helped him sit up, he looked at me with something close to pride. You've grown up, Nida. More than I ever expected. I'm sorry it took me this long to see it. I smiled through my tears. It's never too late, Dad. That evening when I left the hospital, the air felt different, lighter somehow. The city lights shimmered like tiny promises in the distance. The call that morning had changed everything, not just for him but for me too. It reminded me that life has a strange way of circling back, of giving us chances we thought we'd lost forever. As I walked home, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Linda. He asked for your favorite meal tonight. Said it's time to bring home his girl again. I stopped in the middle of the street, tears spilling down my cheeks. Maybe forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it sure could shape the future. And for the first time since that night he shut the door, I knew it was finally opening again. The drive back to my father's mansion felt like stepping into a memory I tried to forget. The closer I got, the tighter my chest became. The neighborhood looked the same. Clean lawns, quiet streets, cars that gleamed like mirrors, but I felt like a stranger now. As the gates opened, I saw the house, 3 stories tall, cold and beautiful, the kind of house that looked like it belonged in a magazine but not in anyone's heart. I parked near the fountain and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The last time I'd stood here, I'd been thrown out with nothing but a suitcase and a shattered sense of worth. Now I was being asked to come back, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a caregiver, a helper. When I stepped out, the chill in the air bit at my skin. The front door opened before I could knock. It was Linda. She smiled faintly. "He's been waiting all morning." I nodded, taking a slow breath. "Let's get this over with." Inside, everything smelled the same: leather polish, fresh lilies, expensive air. But it all felt different. The warmth I used to crave was still missing. The house was beautiful, yes, but it was also painfully empty. "His room's been moved downstairs," Linda said softly, leading me through the marble hallways. "He can't handle the stairs anymore." That sentence hit hard. My father, the man who once commanded rooms full of executives, now confined to a single floor. When I entered his new room, I stopped short. He was in a reclining wheelchair, dressed neatly in a gray sweater, his hair combed back, his posture stiff, but his eyes softened when he saw me. "Nida," he said, his voice low but steady. "You're here." I forced a small smile. "You didn't think I'd skip out on homemade spaghetti night, did you?" He chuckled weakly, and for a moment, it almost felt normal. Almost. I placed my bag down, and Linda quietly slipped away, leaving us alone. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "what's the plan? Doctor visits? Physical therapy?" His smile faded. "They'll send a therapist here twice a week. But I'd rather you handle the day-to-day care. Someone I can trust." There it was again, trust. The same word he'd used over the phone. I wanted to believe him, but part of me still didn't know if that word meant the same thing to him as it did to me. Still, I nodded. "All right. We'll start with basics. Routine, comfort, small goals." He looked up at me with something like gratitude. "You sound like a professional." "I had to learn fast," I said quietly. "Life doesn't give out manuals." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "No, it doesn't." The next few days were awkward. I'd help him with meals, stretches, and medication, but our conversations rarely went beyond small talk. There was a tension neither of us could name. Luke, my younger half-brother, hadn't shown up yet. He was still in a rehabilitation center recovering from his own accident injuries. The house felt too quiet without his usual energy, or maybe it just made the silence louder. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen when I heard a crash. My heart jumped. I ran into the living room and found my father on the floor, his wheelchair tipped sideways. "Dad!" I dropped to my knees beside him. He winced, embarrassed. I tried to get something from the shelf. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," I said sharply, checking his arm for bruises. "You could have hurt yourself." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't need a babysitter, Nida." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "You do need help, and there's no shame in that." For a long moment he didn't say anything. Then his shoulders slumped. "I'm not used to this. Depending on someone." "I know," I said softly. "But you depended on your pride for too long. Maybe it's time to depend on people instead." His eyes met mine and something unspoken passed between us. Acknowledgement, maybe even regret. That evening after dinner, I found myself wandering through the house. Every hallway held a memory. The living room where I'd once played piano until he told me to stop because it distracted him. The study door that had always been locked to me. The family portraits on the staircase. Luke in his graduation robe, my father and stepmother smiling beside him, and me noticeably missing. Standing there, staring at those frames, I felt both invisible and oddly powerful. I was the forgotten one, but I was still here. As I turned away, I noticed a photo half hidden behind a vase. An old picture of me, maybe 10 years old, sitting beside him at a company event, smiling proudly. I wiped the dust off the glass and stared at it for a long time before placing it back on the shelf where it belonged, front and center. The next morning, my father's physical therapist arrived. A kind middle-aged woman named Carol. She taught me how to assist with exercises, how to hold his arms steady, how to encourage him without making him feel weak. During one session, Carol said cheerfully, "You've got a natural touch, Nida. Patients respond to that." My father smiled faintly. "She's always had a soft heart. I just never appreciated it." The words caught me off guard. I blinked at him, unsure what to say. Carol smiled knowingly and stepped out to take a call, giving us space. I finally said, "You don't have to make up for everything, Dad. Just be honest with me." He looked at me for a long time. "Honest?" he repeated. "Then here it is, I was jealous of you." I frowned. "Jealous?" He nodded. "You were strong in ways I wasn't. You didn't care about image or reputation. You just wanted peace. I spent my whole life chasing power, and it left me empty." His voice cracked on that last word. I knelt beside him, my hand resting on his arm. For the first time I saw not the billionaire, but the man beneath it. Flawed, lonely, scared. "I wish you'd said that sooner," I whispered. "So do I," he said. That night I stayed up late in the guest room, unable to sleep. The house creaked with old memories. At one point I heard the faint sound of the rain tapping against the windows, the same sound I'd heard the night he kicked me out. I sat up, staring at the dark ceiling, and whispered to myself, "Why does this place still hurt?" The truth was simple. The house wasn't evil, it just held too many ghosts. The next morning I found him sitting by the window, looking out at the garden. "You were right," he said quietly. "This house doesn't feel like home anymore." I nodded. "Maybe it never did." He smiled sadly. "Then maybe we should change that." For the next few weeks, small changes began to appear. The stiff dining room that once looked like a showroom became a cozy space with warm lights and simple meals. The housekeeper started leaving the windows open to let in fresh air. Even my father's laughter started to sound less forced. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then one afternoon the front door opened and I heard familiar footsteps. Luke was home. I turned, my stomach tightening. He looked different, thinner, quieter, his arm in a brace. When his eyes met mine, he froze. "Nida." I smiled cautiously. "Hey, Luke." For a second he didn't move. Then his voice cracked. "You actually came back." "I did." He took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. For everything I said. For how I treated you." The apology hit me like a wave. I hadn't expected it, not from him. "It's okay," I said softly. "We were kids." He shook his head. "No, I was old enough to know better." Behind him, my father watched quietly, his eyes glistening. For the first time, the three of us stood in the same room, broken but together. Over the next few days, Luke and I found our rhythm. He'd tease me about my coffee addiction. I'd tease him about his terrible taste in music. Sometimes I caught my father watching us, a faint smile tugging at his lips. But even as things began to heal, I knew deep down that I didn't belong here forever. I wasn't the scared girl who had begged for their acceptance anymore. I was here by choice, on my own terms. One evening, as I helped my father transfer from his chair to the bed, he suddenly said, "You've changed this house, Nida. You made it breathe again." I smiled. "I didn't do anything. I just opened a few windows." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, you did more than that. You brought me back to life." I didn't know what to say. The man who once shut me out was now thanking me for simply being here. As I turned off the lights and wished him good night, I paused at the door, looking around the room. The cold marble floors, the heavy curtains, the polished wood, all still there. But somehow it felt warmer now. Maybe not home yet, but closer than it had ever been. That night, as I walked down the hallway, the faint hum of music came from Luke's room. The same song I used to play on the piano years ago. I stopped to listen, smiling softly. For the first time since I'd been back, I didn't feel like an outsider. And as I headed upstairs to my room, I whispered to myself, maybe the house doesn't have to feel like home. Maybe the people do. The first morning after Luke returned to the house, I woke to the sound of quiet chatter downstairs. I paused at my bedroom door, listening. My father and Luke were in the kitchen, probably planning breakfast. For a moment, I felt a strange sensation I hadn't experienced in years: ease. Not the fragile, temporary ease of survival, but a slow, steady comfort that this family, however flawed, was slowly becoming something I could inhabit again. I dressed quickly and went downstairs. The smell of coffee and toast filled the air. My father was spreading butter on a slice of bread, while Luke leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone. Both of them looked up as I entered, and I offered a tentative smile. "Morning," I said softly. "Morning, Nida," Luke replied, a hint of warmth in his voice. "Coffee?" my father asked. His tone was cautious, almost careful, like he was testing the waters of our newfound connection. "Yes, please," I said, moving to the counter. I poured a cup and added cream, stirring slowly. Watching him move across the kitchen in this slow, measured way, I realized how much had changed in just a few weeks. The man who had once towered over me with authority, whose word had been law, now needed help with everything, even getting dressed some mornings. It struck me, uncomfortably, how powerless he looked without his usual control. But it also gave me perspective. Power isn't always about money, status, or influence. Sometimes real power is learning to ask for help, to depend on others, to open your heart despite fear. After breakfast, we settled into our morning routines. Luke went to physical therapy sessions downstairs, my father practiced small mobility exercises, and I helped him with meals and medication. Yet amid these ordinary tasks, something extraordinary began to happen. Conversations. Real conversations, not the polite, shallow exchanges of before. One afternoon, while helping him adjust in the chair by the window, he said, "I've been thinking a lot, Nida, about how I treated you." I glanced at him cautiously. "What about it?" He sighed. "I see now that pushing you away, that shutting the door on you, it wasn't teaching you anything. It was selfish. I wanted control. I wanted to feel superior. And I lost sight of what really mattered. Family." I didn't respond immediately. His words carried the weight of genuine regret, but my emotions were tangled. Part of me wanted to forgive. Part of me remembered the nights I cried alone, the months I spent figuring out how to survive without him. Finally I said, "I needed you, Dad. I needed a father, not a lesson in power." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "And you deserved that. You deserved love, patience, guidance, not my pride. I can't change the past, but I want to make it right if you let me." The moment stretched between us, heavy with unspoken history. I realize forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about acknowledging the hurt, seeing the remorse, and deciding on your own terms what to do next. I can try," I said finally. "I don't know if I can do it perfectly, but I want to try." He nodded slowly. "That's all I ask." The days that followed were small lessons in rebuilding trust. It wasn't dramatic or sweeping. It was the quiet acceptance of presence, the willingness to help without complaint, the gentle teasing and laughter that crept into our routines. One evening, I caught my father sitting alone in the study, staring at a photograph of me from when I was little. I didn't want to intrude, but I spoke softly. "Thinking about the past?" He looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "Yeah. I keep remembering moments I wish I hadn't taken for granted." I sat beside him, careful not to touch the fragile space between us. "We can't change them, but we can make new memories." He nodded, placing the photo down. "New memories, yes. I'd like that." The realization hit me. Forgiveness doesn't erase mistakes, but it allows the possibility of rebuilding something meaningful. And maybe that's all anyone really wants. Luke's recovery was slow, but having him home added a new rhythm to the house. We learned to support each other in ways we hadn't before. He admitted, hesitantly at first, how guilty he felt about everything that had happened, how he'd mocked me, doubted me, and never stood up for me when I needed protection. "I should have been there for you," he said one evening as we watched a movie together. "I was scared of losing my place. I was selfish." I looked at him, searching his eyes. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me the way you did. But you did. And that has to be acknowledged." He nodded slowly. "I know. I want to make it right." That was the moment I realized forgiveness wasn't just about my father. It was about everyone who had been part of my world. Forgiveness meant allowing people to come back, but on my terms, with honesty, with effort. A week later, my father asked me to help him with a business call. The sight of him, frail yet determined, reminded me how far he'd fallen from the man I remembered. I sat across from him at the table, holding the laptop. "Do you want me to handle this?" I asked. No, he said firmly. I want you here. I want you to see that I'm trying. As we went through the numbers and emails, I realized something else. Forgiveness doesn't have to mean blind trust. It can coexist with careful observation, with maintaining boundaries, with expecting accountability. And maybe, I thought quietly, that was the healthiest kind. One rainy afternoon, Luke and I sat in the living room, watching the droplets race down the windows. The house was quiet except for the soft patter of rain. You're doing good here, Luke said, breaking the silence. I'm getting there, I said, tracing a finger along the edge of the coffee table. It's strange. This house was never home for me. But now, I think I can make it feel like that. Slowly. He nodded. I think Dad's trying too. Maybe forgiveness works both ways. I smiled faintly. Yeah, maybe it does. And in that quiet moment, with rain tapping gently on the glass and the two people I loved most nearby, I understood that forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a process. A series of choices to let go, to accept, to rebuild. Then came the night that tested everything. My father called me into the bedroom after Luke had gone to sleep. I've been thinking about us, he said, voice trembling. About the mistakes I've made. About the way I treated you. About the way I excluded you. I want you to know. I see you. I see everything you've done. Everything you've survived. And I am sorry. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. I don't expect everything to go back to how it was, he continued. I just want a chance to make things right. To be a better father, and for you to forgive me. Not because I demand it, but because you want to. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Dad, forgive you. But it's going to take time for me to feel completely safe, to trust fully. And that's okay. He reached for my hand, careful, almost tentative. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes. I squeezed his hand gently, feeling the years of pain, anger, and abandonment compress into a quiet space of understanding. Over the next several weeks, our home transformed, not physically but emotionally. The kitchen was filled with laughter during meals, Luke's voice echoed with playful teasing, and my father's quiet gratitude began to replace his old, unyielding authority. We learned new ways to communicate, checking in, admitting mistakes, apologizing without pride. The house, once cold and sterile, became a place where mistakes could be acknowledged without judgment, where hurt could exist alongside healing. I began to see forgiveness not as an end, but as a living thing, constantly nurtured, constantly growing, constantly tested. One evening I sat on the porch with Luke, watching the sunset paint the sky in orange and pink hues. You know, he said thoughtfully, I think you were always the glue holding this family together. I just didn't realize it. I laughed softly. I don't feel like glue. More like duct tape. He smiled, shaking his head. Duct tape that fixes everything. I leaned back, letting the breeze wash over me. Maybe that's what forgiveness feels like, I said quietly. Not magic. Not forgetting. But finding the strength to stay, to care, to keep trying. Luke nodded. Yeah, I get that. The final test came unexpectedly. My father's former business partner called, asking him to return to work temporarily. He hesitated. I don't want to leave you alone again, he said, worried. I smiled. You've done enough. Your health, your recovery, that matters more. We've got this. He looked at me, gratitude and humility shining in his eyes. I'm proud of you, Nida. For everything. For staying. For teaching me what family really is. And I realized then, forgiveness isn't just a gift to others. It's a gift to yourself. It frees you from the bitterness that can otherwise consume a life. The next morning I made breakfast for all three of us. As we sat around the table laughing and sharing stories, I looked at my father, at Luke, and finally at myself. We weren't perfect. We'd been broken in ways that left scars. But for the first time in years I felt a quiet certainty. We could be whole again, not in spite of our past, but because of the choices we made to heal. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't erase history. It shapes the future. And in that house, the house that never felt like home, it finally began to feel like exactly that, home.